Kenneth Herring's family did not remember him as a dangerous man. They remembered him as Ken, the older brother who joked too much, the man who teased his sisters and called one of them Biscuit Head just to make her laugh, the uncle who checked on family members before checking on himself, a hard-working 62-year-old who spent years doing physical labor in air conditioning and mechanical repair jobs. But on May 7th, 2019, the world stopped calling him Ken. He became the drunk driver, the fleeing suspect, the dangerous man. A 21-year-old woman claimed she had to stop, and within minutes, he was dead on the side of a Georgia road. At first, Hannah Payne insisted she was the real victim. Her attorneys described her as a brave young woman trying to protect the public after witnessing a hit-and-run accident. They said she feared for her life. They argued she never intended to pull the trigger. But prosecutors saw something very different. Not self-defense, not heroism, not courage. They saw a young woman so convinced she had the right to play police officer that she ignored warning after warning until another human being ended up dead. That night began with a traffic accident near Interstate 285 in Clayton County, Georgia. Kenneth Herring ran a red light and collided with a semi-truck. Witnesses immediately noticed something strange about him. His eyes appeared reddish and unfocused. He looked confused, disoriented, like he did not fully understand what was happening around him. One witness, Terry Robinson, believed Herring might have been suffering from diabetic shock, a serious medical condition capable of causing confusion, panic, and erratic behavior. But Hannah Payne interpreted the situation differently. To her, Kenneth Herring looked dangerous. She called 911 and waited with others at the scene while police were supposedly on the way. Nearly 20 minutes passed. Then, suddenly, Herring got back into his truck and started driving away. That should have been the end of Hannah's involvement. Instead, it became the beginning of a tragedy. The dispatcher repeatedly told her not to follow him. Not once, not twice, multiple times. By that point, Hannah already had the truck's license plate number. Police were already responding. She had all the information necessary to let law enforcement handle the situation. But Hannah Payne made a decision that would change two families forever. She decided she would stop him herself. This is the moment where the line between witness and vigilante disappeared. At just 21 years old, Hannah had recently received her concealed carry permit. She legally owned a Springfield handgun and believed she was capable of protecting herself and others. But somewhere between concern and control, something shifted. Her actions no longer resembled caution, they resembled authority. The prosecution later argued that Hannah was not acting out of fear, she was acting out of arrogance, the dangerous belief that she had the right to enforce the law herself. And the most damaging part? She ignored direct instructions from emergency dispatchers while continuing the pursuit anyway. She followed Kenneth Herring for nearly a mile. Then she cut him off with her Jeep. An older man who may have been suffering a medical emergency suddenly found himself trapped by an armed stranger screaming at him to get out of the vehicle. Witnesses later testified that Hannah's behavior was aggressive from the moment she approached the truck. Not calm, not cautious, aggressive. One witness recalled hearing her scream, "Get the F out of the car." Others described her cursing repeatedly while confronting the 62-year-old man inside the truck. The defense later attempted to portray Hannah as someone politely trying to help. But eyewitness accounts painted a completely different picture. A young, armed woman escalating an already unstable situation. Then came the gun. Hannah claimed Kenneth grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward the truck. She insisted the firearm discharged during a struggle and that she never intentionally fired the shot. But prosecutors focused on a simple reality. None of this would have happened if Hannah Payne had not introduced a loaded weapon into a roadside confrontation she created herself. Experts later discussed the mechanics of the Springfield pistol. It was not a weapon known for randomly firing without deliberate trigger pressure. The defense tried to create doubt about whose finger pulled the trigger. But prosecutors argued something more important. The person who escalated the situation was Hannah. She chose to chase him. She chose to block his vehicle. She chose to approach him with a firearm. Every step moved closer to violence, and eventually, violence arrived. The bullet struck Kenneth Herring in the abdomen. He later died from the wound. But what disturbed many people even more than the shooting itself was Hannah Payne's behavior afterward. Witnesses described her calmly changing clothes near the scene after the shooting. Others said she showed surprisingly little emotion while talking to police. One witness later testified she had no remorse. Even the 911 call sounded chilling to many listeners. At one point, Hannah reportedly stated that she was safe, but Kenneth was not. Meanwhile, Kenneth Herring was bleeding inside his truck. The courtroom battle lasted years. By the time the trial finally began in late 2023, prosecutors had assembled an overwhelming timeline of decisions, showing how a concerned citizen transformed into the aggressor. The prosecution focused heavily on Hannah's changing story. At different points, her descriptions of the shooting shifted. Earlier statements suggested her finger had been near the trigger. Later testimony attempted to distance herself completely from firing the weapon intentionally. The defense tried one final strategy. They argued Terry Robinson, the off-duty corrections officer at the crash scene, had encouraged Hannah to follow Herring. But prosecutors reminded jurors of something impossible to ignore. The dispatcher repeatedly told her to stop, and she refused. 5 days of testimony eventually led to the moment that changed Hannah Payne's life forever. The jury found her guilty of malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, false imprisonment, and firearm charges. When the verdicts were read aloud, Hannah lowered her head and cried. But for Kenneth Herring's family, the tears changed nothing. One of his sisters later told the court, when they closed that casket, that door never opened again. The judge sentenced Hannah Payne to life with the possibility of parole, plus additional consecutive years. A young woman who once believed she was doing the right thing would now spend decades behind bars, and Kenneth Herring would never return home. The case also fueled larger debates across Georgia about citizens' arrest laws and vigilante behavior. Critics argued the tragedy exposed how dangerous it becomes when ordinary people confuse suspicion with authority. Because this case was never just about a traffic accident, it was about control, ego, fear, and what happens when someone mistakes personal judgment for legal power. 2 lives were destroyed that night. One man lost his future forever, and one young woman lost nearly all of hers because she believed carrying a gun gave her the right to decide who deserved to be stopped. Sometimes people convince themselves they are protecting the world while becoming the very danger they claim to fear.